So basically, I'm just kind of talking to everybody who's been a part of the record, and then just riffing, and maybe like I'm gonna start posting it on YouTube, and possibly make it into like a podcast later on. Just kind of about me. Just I've been meeting so many people through taking this full time, and I just wanted to talk with people about like making music and whatever. So I thought it would be cool just to talk a little bit with you. And yeah, we could talk about the record, or we could just talk about influences, or just riff, man. Really, it's just conversation. And then I chop it up later, and then just kind of try to keep it under an hour. I guess people listen to the conversation me and AJ had. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, because I posted it on YouTube, and then so people have been commenting on it. So it's getting a little bit of traction. Whatever. I mean, it's all kind of part of the master plan and in promotion. So, and I love talking to people about music and just life. So you would be surprised, man. I've just been like reaching out to people, and then I end up just like kind of randomly meeting folks that are like doing music, and then like on Instagram, I never met them before, and then I'll just hit them up and we'll have like conversation. And yeah, people got a lot to talk about, especially right now. It's been really hard for a lot of folks. So it's great to connect with people, and just see what they're up to.
Yeah, it's cool, man.
Yeah, it's like somewhere in between like super stressed and anxious. Most people are, and then on the other side, they're like, it's been one of the most creative times I've had in a long time, which is interesting. So that because they're just inside doing, and everybody's kind of heading this home recording route,
Yeah, for sure. It's too easy not to at this point.
I know. So what have you been working on?
Honestly, I'm not really working on much of anything except trying to figure out the technology. So I sold a bunch of my older gear.
Yeah.
And I bought this Apollo Twin, and then I bought a keyboard. What's it called? A Keylab Essentials.
Oh, cool.
Keylab Essential 49. It's like a MIDI
Arturia.
controller.
Yeah.
Yeah, Arturia.
And you're like playing drums with that, or you're doing like chords?
Yeah. So I've been doing some drum stuff, and then I just got this thing called Easy Drummer.
Nice.
They had a great Black Friday sale, so I got that and a couple of MIDI packs with it. So I'm just not accustomed to this world, and it's taken me a long time to just get the basics down. And yeah, I don't know. It's honestly it's discouraging, because I think like, man, if I had done this like 5 years ago, or even I would have mastered it, and like I would have process down and
workflow.
Not mastered it, but yeah, like just, I don't know, time constraints with work life and family life it's radically altered my artistic expectations of myself.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's hard when it's like, okay, I have a little bit of time to be artistic, but it's like, oh my gosh, I got to learn all this crap first before I can actually start rolling with it.
Yeah, it's like I want to record a riff, and then, oh, this doesn't work. I wonder why. And then I'm on YouTube for 40 minutes trying to figure out the one button I have to push to get it to work. And yeah, so I've come away pretty defeated.
Yeah, dude.
From the a couple of the times that I've tried to sit down and figure this stuff out. But I don't know, it's like climbing a mountain. Eventually you get to the top. So
yeah, once you get the workflow
out.
Down, I think you can. Really, the sky's the limit. Are you trying to do some like metal stuff? Or are you doing songwriter stuff? What route do you want to take?
Yeah, it's sort of like pushing myself to try to play some metal stuff.
That's cool.
Well, maybe. It's kind of cheesy too, but I think that, I don't know, I haven't written like a singer-songwriter song in probably 3 years. There's just not what comes to me.
Mm-hmm.
I still love so much good singer-songwriter, good Americana, rock and roll music. But it's sort of like an artistically dry well for me right now. Yeah, in a weird turn of events, I got back into metal in my 30s, and then I'm kind of fascinated with how to just create atmosphere and more long-form song structure and compositions than I'm accustomed to. I'm really, I learned how to write like a 3.5 minute pop song with all the fat cut off, and I got to the point where I could sort of do that on demand, and I feel like, I don't know, I just got a little tired of it, or it didn't excite me as much. I hope to get back to it. I just need a different creative horizon to kind of push me into this next phase of at-home recording.
Yeah, it's funny because when I work with artists, I've been, what's the word? Blessed enough to start working with people, and dude, I cut stuff so much. And then I've been working with some people who are kind of in that like shoegazer, emo, like post-rock world, and they're like, man, I just want this part to vibe out a little more. I'm just like, any millisecond that I can chop off of a song, I'm like going for it. And I think it was because his influence, kind of that idea, like, let's fit this into a 3-minute pop song structure. All right, kill that bridge, or like, let's jump right into the bridge there. And I've had a few people be like, no, I think it should like vibe out a little more here. And I'm like, oh, interesting. I'm just so used to that influence from you of just like where, and you kind of approach it as a problem to be solved almost. It's like, where can you get the point across in the song, but like take out the stuff you don't need?
I would say I sort of stand by that general approach. So I always talked about kind of trimming down songs as cutting the fat. Because when I started writing songs, I was writing these 5.5 minute plus songs because I was writing completely by intuition. I had no concept of song structure. And this guy from a punk rock band I was into as a kid basically sent me an email and said, hey, this is what pop song structure is like. Try this. And then I became kind of obsessive about understanding pop song structure. And anyhow, I was writing these long songs that didn't have very much internal logic, and they were stuffed with cool parts, but they didn't flow or vibe. And so I think kind of starting with understanding how to cut the fat will help you to understand like when to keep it. You know what I mean?
It's like the good fats versus this, the saturated fats. You got the avocados. I guess you got like the bacon fat. I mean, I don't know. You could argue whether that's good or not, but
it's quite good.
Yeah, it's quite good. But it's like, okay, where's the saturated fat that needs to be, kept, and then what can be like gotten rid of? So the good fat, you're looking for the good fat.
Yeah. Well, I think of an example of that is off of the Rev record, the Rude Man Radio. It's sort of like a tighter pop structure, right? And then it just kind of opens up into this extensive jam. That's not characteristic of the rest of the record, and you might say like, well, that's some fat right there,
right?
But that's the good stuff. So I guess as I'm approaching my newer stuff, I want to continue to have that sort of ruthless cutting perspective, so that I'm constantly cutting the stuff that's unessential,
right?
So that all that's left is stuff I love and that works well together and flows.
And do you when that individual told you about the pop song structure, did he reference like a song like this is the pop song structure, or did he give you like, I don't know, like reference tracks to listen to, or he just said, hey, this is what it is?
So he basically just wrote out in the email like, hey, you got a lot of potential as a songwriter, but I can tell that you don't know basic pop song structure. Listen to Blink 182 and Green Day, and then listen to Britney Spears, this is who was popular at the time. And he says essentially like, if you listen to songs by any of these people, you're gonna have an intro riff followed by a verse followed by a chorus. Sometimes there's a pre-chorus, and then repeat. Intro, verse, chorus, and then You're going to have some kind of a bridge that takes the song into a new emotional space. And then you're going to have 2 choruses and you're out. Of course, there are songs that diverge from that pattern, but the majority of pop songs for the last 60, 70 years are following that general pathway. So that really opened up my mind to, one, the similarity of music.
Yeah.
Like at the time I thought Britney Spears and Green Day couldn't be farther apart, but of course they're swimming in the same like musical space. But it also helped me to realize that songwriting was achievable. Like I could write a song and I could finish a song. So that was the other aspect of songwriting that I was finding myself going like, these are cool parts, but how do I land this,
Yeah.
or what is this missing? And learning that traditional structure helped me to get a sense for what was available to me as far as starting songs, ending songs, taking songs in a new direction with a bridge or whatever. Yeah, it was really helpful for me. But then I'd say over the last 5 years or so, I've gotten into more like long form ambient stuff, a lot of black metal, doom metal, death metal. That just takes. I mean, some of those genres do adhere to a more pop structure. You can find bands in those scenes that still follow the verse, chorus, bridge, chorus structure.
Right.
But a lot of them are breaking out of that and going more by intuition, or they're influenced by classical musical structures, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Who do you think came up with the pop formula, or do you think it just was like a group thing kind of thing?
That's a good question. I don't know. My guess is that it would probably be the studios and the producers, particularly in the 50s and 60s. All the hit records were going through the same studios, both in the US and in the UK. So you had these like little hit making factories
with like the Wrecking Crew and like you had all those studio musicians. They knew what to do, when to do it, and then someone calling the shots.
Yeah, listen to like Sun Records. You have that Johnny Cash sound, and so much of what Sun Records did ends up sounding. They're all these like 2-minute and 12-second kind of goofy little pop songs.
Yeah.
At that point, they didn't really play with bridges too much. It was a lot of just verse chorus structure with a solo. And then I don't know the origins, but it's cool. It's pretty cool to watch the trajectory of that structure, though, to see how it can be expanded and stretched. And of course you can like rebel against it and create unique stuff in contrast to it.
And then it's like you get into psychedelics, man, and then people were just like, nah, dude, forget it, we're just gonna jam on this for forever, we're just gonna riff. And then and it was more about, I guess, less like concerned with like, okay, this will fit on the radio, and it's more like, how is this going to like create an atmosphere for the listener? I guess you don't have to get high to enjoy it, but like kind of shaping some sort of like experience for the listener, and then probably people just like hitting record and then just like wilding out for for quite a bit. Maybe they chopped it up, but that's probably when like the fade in started coming in. The producer, or fade out. The producer's like, yep, we're good.
Well, a lot of it was about material constraints as well, because you went from 78s, which have a particular runtime, and then 45s became popular. And I don't know what the runtime on a single side of a 45 is. It's like 7 minutes.
Right. So
your song had to fit on that side if you wanted anybody to hear it. The LP was just sort of viewed as this, which is, I think, 22 minutes per side that you can get on a 33 1/3 LP.
Right.
It was viewed as a place to kind of collect the odds and ends of the singles.
Right.
And then mid-60s, you had artists like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, notably, who elevated the LP up, and it was no longer just, we're collecting singles, but it became sort of like a long-form narrative style. So at that point, then you have these, you're like, we got 22 minutes on this side.
Yeah.
And so by the late 60s, you got like these jam bands that start to emerge. I don't know. Think of somebody like Wishbone Ash or whoever, even Neil Young started extending his solos, and it just kind of grew from there. But then that's the crazy thing about the new digital world, is that you don't actually have these physical constraints anymore. You have 80 minutes on a CD. So CDs, enabled this larger vision of how long a song could be. But then you see it in the metal world now. It's like without the time constraints. One of a really great doom band called Bellwitch put out an incredible record called Mirror Reaper a couple years ago, and I think it's one song and it's 88 minutes long.
Oh my goodness.
So that means it doesn't fit on any of the traditional formats. So, they released it on a double LP, but they have to fade them in and fade them out for the different sides.
Wow.
Like listening to it on your phone is like a true way to listen to the full piece.
I'm thinking of like on Spotify how you can go, people, back in the day when they would fade in and fade out tracks, and they would be like one long track or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember being so frustrated when iTunes came out, because then it would skip. There would be like a stop, and then the next track would start. And you're like, nah, dude, this is supposed to be seamless. So thinking along the lines of like the digital platform kind of jammed up what was supposed to happen on the record. But now people can approach it as like, okay, the way to hear this is not necessarily, I mean, you can get the vinyl, but the way to really fully experience it is through the digital platform.
Yeah, you really see it with ambient stuff too. A really cool record that I've been listening to a lot in 2020 to keep myself calm. What's it called? I think it's Kenji Kihara's. It's like Sleep, Slope, something else. But it's 6 songs and it runs 3 hours. So it's like these 30-minute kind of meditative ambient pieces. And it's not released on a physical format. I mean, that's how it's intended to be experienced, in these huge, you're like bathing in these huge chunks of ambient noise.
Wow. Does Silas, your son, does he dig it?
He doesn't really notice ambient music.
Right.
So like one of my favorite ambient acts is Stars of the Lid, and I have a couple of their records on vinyl, and if that's on, it's like he doesn't even know that music is playing, because it's such like subtle tones.
Right.
But he digs a lot of music. That's actually been one of the cooler things about being a dad for the first time. And he's 20 months old now.
That's so cool.
He's he's into some music. He has his own Spotify playlist of like things that he responds to.
Yeah, that's crazy. Who does he dig? Or who does he respond to, I guess?
He likes upbeat stuff, generally.
Mm-hmm.
When he was an infant, there's this whole world I had no idea about of lullaby renditions of classic music.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was like a month old, we were listening to Tom Petty lullabies and Bruce Springsteen lullabies, and there's actually a Wilco lullabies record.
God bless those people, man. They're making talk about like a secondary market, man. That's brilliant.
Yeah, they're also just they crank them out. Like every artist has like 80 albums, because it'd probably take about a week to make
I know, man.
a lullaby version of Aerosmith or something.
It's like back in the day when you'd go to Best Buy and see like those CDs that were like string quartet of Radiohead or string quartet.
Yeah.
They would like, somebody would go in and arrange all those songs and then record like a string quartet doing them.
Yeah, he was into that as a little infant.
Yeah.
And then the first music that he listened to was just what I was into at the time, which was a lot of like stoner doom stuff. So we listened to a lot of Sabbath and Windhand in particular, Sleep, that kind of stuff. And he seemed to, I mean, what do I know about what a 6-month-old likes? But now he loves David Bowie. He really likes Deep Purple.
Yeah.
He likes the Byrds. Oh, it's funny. You know how Spotify does those wrapped things where it like sums up what you've been listening to all year? So this year they do this thing where it's like the one song that got you through it all.
Yeah, yeah.
And mine pops up, and it was Jumping in the House of God by Worldwide Message Tribe, which is this...
Jumping in the house, so jumping in the house of God. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's like so this youth group jock jam song that I heard growing up in church. And for whatever reason, he latched onto that song at about a year old. And so it's been played a million times in our
Who's
house.
getting the royalties from that is my question. I thought about that with because I went over to my brother's house the other day, and I just walk in and it's like a freaking nightclub because Malachi just tells his like 5-year-old son's like, Alexa, play Vanga Bus is coming, and then they're just like, the Vanga Bus is coming, and it just is like bumping, and Josh is like, this is all freaking day, and I'm like, who is getting all of these royalties from this kid just playing on repeat this song?
That's where the money is, man.
It is, man. People want that. I mean, kids, there's something about it. I mean, talk about formula. It has to be like it just was, I don't know. There's just a formula to those songs that are just so catchy and so annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Like Who Let the Dogs Out or something, you know? But there's like the kids go bananas for it and they'll just play that on repeat.
Yeah. Let's try to crack the code.
Yeah, dude, Baby Shark or something. Nah, I just can't. I thought about that. You think about like certain things that could like, because if you want to do this like full time, you know, you got to figure out a way to get some sort of secondary income like coming in. And so I was like, man, I guess you could just, I guess I could get up Sean, my wife, to like, we could just cover, I don't know. There's people like got covers on Spotify that got millions and millions of listens, and they just, it can be an income that comes in because it's a beautiful song that's already been written. And then if you can be like, nah, dude, it's cool to not have to be the original one to do it. And you're willing to just go like I'm going to,
like the coffee shop cover.
Yeah, man. Just get on a playlist, and then, it's not going to be a ton, but it could be something that comes through down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But then you got to kill that inner punk rock guy that wants to do everything, wants to do the originals. I had this crazy idea that I don't know if it'll ever work, but I thought about like writing like a bunch of like bomb songs, just badass songs, and then just like release it and just say it was like a cover record. I'm sure someone's done this. And just like make up all these bands from the 60s that like didn't exist, and just say, oh, these are all covers from, I don't know, the Butterflies. I'm sure there are the Butterflies out there somewhere. Or somebody like something like, just so it's like you get kind of that clout of like, oh man, he's a crate digger. He found some like really cool stuff.
That's fascinating. So you think that the cover, like the act of covering in and of itself now gives you clout in our current music climate? I had never thought that, but maybe.
I'm curious. And to see if like, okay, if this was a song that he wrote or she wrote, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. But then to think about it, like, I guess like ghostwriting or pseudonyms or whatever, like how they would write back in the day, or even now, I guess, and then thinking of like, does it kind of carry a different aura with it when it's like, oh, this was something that was written during like the Vietnam War. Oh, that makes so much sense. But really it was just a song that was written in 2020, or something like that.
It's a period piece.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I thought about it. I don't know if I'll ever pull through with it, but I think...
Yeah, it probably won't get you as many plays as Baby Shark, is my guess.
Man. God bless those guys. Whoever it was, I'm sure I could find out. So I wanted to... I thought it could be cool to talk through... One of the things, because we did a bunch of records together in studios, and then you kind of had an idea of doing a Kickstarter, and instead of raising money to go pay for studio time, you kind of were like, let's just get some equipment.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just that, well, it was a congruence of things. One was that you and I were involved on a number of different records with a number of different projects, and we were going to these studios and paying, significant amounts of money for time in the studios. And as a result, we were feeling rushed, feeling like pretty limited in what we were able to get down in the recording process. And a lot of stuff was having to be handled in post-production by producers. And, there's something kind of magical about being in a traditional studio. Like a sacred, dedicated space for music. It's not very romantic, the setup I have in my multi-use office here.
Right.
So that was happening, and then Kickstarter was like really booming at the time.
Yeah.
And I had been a part of projects that had used Kickstarter, and realized like, oh, I have a network of people that probably would be willing to invest in me making a record. And I think I could probably, I thought maybe I could hit 10 grand. But I realized that if I spent 10 grand on a studio, that I wouldn't have enough to finish like I wouldn't have enough to master it
Right.
or put it out. And so, yeah, I was just sort of like doing the math and then realizing at the same time, oh, the gear that's in these studios is available to me at what at the time seemed like a reasonable cost. It's far more reasonable now than it was even then. So, yeah, that's what I did. I got a bunch of gear that 5 years later is completely outdated.
Right.
So this is it's like the music technology company's dream to have us all addicted to home recording because we're going to all have to be upgrading every 5 years. But yeah, it provides a lot of independence and autonomy. I found the one thing that it does that does not help my creative process is that being in a formal studio with limited time that I was paying for or that someone was paying for put this pressure on me that for some reason it made me like ultra creative on the spot in a way that I cannot seem to reproduce in just open-ended recording sessions that can go on and on and on. And so what happened with my J. Walter Weatherman record is having the good gear at home meant that I spent like a year and a half noodling with the guitars on that album.
Right.
And even I love that album. I love the songs, but it like the process of that leaves a sour taste in my mouth. So I'm trying to figure out how to avoid that. There's something about the constraints of a formal studio and a limited budget that make you commit to what you create earlier.
Right.
Because, when it's open-ended, you're just like constantly iterating and believing that there's always a better take or there's a better riff or a better hook or whatever.
Right.
Which is theoretically true, but you don't want to exhaust yourself in the creative process. So,
yeah, and you kind of lose the intuition that comes with that pressure.
Yeah.
In some ways, because I think a lot about that with commitment and like what they would call just like putting it on wax, like just get it out and print it, just get your idea out and print it and then be cool with that. I do that with MIDI all the time because MIDI, you could go in and flip up all sorts of different things, change this, change that, which is great. Yeah. It's like the most versatile tool that I use. But a lot of times I end up just like bouncing those tracks so that they're just audio. And then you deal with the audio that you have. You make it work.
Yeah. Because when you put a track down, what happens is you build on top of it, and whatever comes next is, and this is assuming you're doing multi-track recording and not playing live.
Right.
You put a guitar lead down that's not completely ideal. And then, as long as you don't have any terrible notes in there, well, you just come in and, you put down a bed of synth or piano or strings or something else that does the job that track couldn't do for whatever reason. So I find committing to takes earlier than later produces more interesting outcomes than, slaving over a guitar solo for 2 weeks.
Right. And I think that also works with the structure part because once you get that structure down, then it opens up so much room to be creative. Because then you have, okay, I'm working within these constraints. What can I do with this, How can I MacGyver my way in and out of this situation? This is what I've been given. Let's work with it. And don't mess with the structure as much as you can. As almost like an act of discipline in some ways, of like being like, this works. It's worked over the years. Just work it in your own way and rework it in your own way. And I've always thought that about you. Like when we were recording this record, I was like, let's get him in there for 2 hours, just press record and let him go. And then at the end of that 2 hours, I think he'll have pooped himself out. He's like, I'm done. I'm over this. Let's move on to the next thing, but like within that 2 hours, getting that the juice, cause that pressure's on or even that time frame is on. And you're like, okay, I got to produce something in this time. Let's go with it. And then you just record and just keep it on. And then you have those takes to go back through and do the producer thing if you wanted to, cut them up, do whatever. But it's It's the importance of just like vibing right from whatever atmosphere you're in at that moment, you know. Because I
Mm-hmm.
thought about that a lot with the Rev record is basically like, yeah, there's a lot of things that I wish were a little, I wouldn't say a lot of things, but it was a snapshot, a time capsule of where we were at the time, you know.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be anything other than like a time capsule of like some homies who wrote some songs and they wanted to get them down,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I mean, that's like one of the most beautiful elements of it, is that you can kind of capture where you are at that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're talking about constraints on two levels now. You know, the
Mm.
physical constraint of the old records and then the tapes and CDs, and now we're talking about constraints on recording music. It's sort of like the eternality, the potential. You could hit record and go forever as long as your hard drive is,
Right.
and that presents real challenges to me,
Terrifying.
anyhow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's a gift in the constraints. That's why I think a lot of them at this point have to be self-imposed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll just kind of drown in what's possible.
Speaking of MacGyvering, you put together a because we recorded a lot of this record just in, you know, triple deckers all around Boston. So you had neighbors
Mhm.
upstairs and down. So you couldn't be like super loud, and we weren't going the studio route for most of it. So you
Mhm.
kind of like put together a contraption that you could like house your amp in so that it wouldn't be like distracting the neighbors and stuff. And then
Mhm.
how did you come up with that, man? I mean, I guess you Googled it, but like you put a lot of like TLC into that thing.
Yeah, that thing's crazy, man. So I went to Home Depot and bought a bunch of wood and insulation and made my own isolation box on wheels.
So cool.
That is, it's still at Andrew DeBond's apartment.
It's great.
It's like traveling with him now.
Yeah.
I don't know. We talked about like should we get rid of this or not. Yeah, I mean it perfectly housed my AC-15. It did its job. You know, the downside of that is that there is something that happens to a guitar and its tone and the function of an amp when it has an open room
Mm,
into which the sound waves can go. So
right.
it's like this amp, which sounds great, is in this isolation box and like 3 inches away from the face of the speaker. It's running into insulation, and so it's
Right.
losing something. So it did sound kind of dead end and muffled, in my opinion. You know,
You could hear the difference.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Just because I know what a cranked, unrestrained open air amp sounds like, and feels like, and I definitely felt that was lacking. Um, but it's funny. I mean, now the other day I borrowed our friend Young had this pedal called an Iridium from Strymon. You familiar with this?
Nah, man.
It's basically like an amp and cab simulator
Yeah, I've heard of these
where
types.
that
Yeah.
you run direct. Like literally plug your guitar into this pedal and then run your pedal directly into your interface.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, man, I'm not going back to live guitars unless I can, or like amped guitars, unless I can get into an open air space and interact with the amp. So, because it sounds fantastic, you know, it's achieving at least what my amp was doing, which is crazy to say because I've been
I
committed
know.
to tube amps since I was like 13. But the technology is just like catching up, and so that's the direction I'm heading.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. You're very particular about how it broke up, right? You needed it to push. I mean, I'm not a big amp guy, but I know
Mm-hmm.
that people obsess over how hard to push it or not to push it so that it breaks up at the right time for certain.
Yeah.
It's like the littlest adjustments actually for a guitar player who's into it makes a difference, I guess, when you're feeling it and you're playing it, because those babies are really hard to tame post production. There's so many harmonics going like wild, and when I'm
Mm-hmm.
like doing EQs, I'm trying to like keep the tone because I know the
Mm-hmm.
tone's important, but then also just like it's just wilding out. There's just like so much just going on, like all these frequencies coming out of nowhere, just spiking here and there. And it's like, oh,
Huh.
that's really cool. Let's keep that And then like the computer's like freaking out. It's just like you need to like to kill this tone because it's just it's so out there. But then that's part of the sound, I guess.
There'd really be no way to truly compare it other than to kind of, if you're in a live setting and then you have a open air tube amp and then sitting next to it is you're running through your amp cab simulator through a computer into a soundboard out of a PA system. Right. I have to imagine that the amp's going to sound better in that setting. Yeah, honestly, putting the amp in that cabinet, it was great and it was a good solution for that time. But it's sort of sad to me because it kind of marks the end of my relationship to the guitar in a visceral way. I mean, like just growing up and playing in punk rock bands, like you're standing in front of these stacks and you're feeling it in your body, and you just like when you turn around and you just let that thing feed back and scream at you, and just like honestly, there's nothing like that feeling. And so that's just not a part of my life anymore. That kind of sucks,
Yeah.
And it's weird to think about recording something as visceral as metal in the box,
I know.
And with like fake drums and a direct input guitar or whatever.
In the way that you as a guitar player respond to the amp, pardon the pun, but amps up the audience,
Oh yeah.
Because you are responding to it. And then I remember when we were recording the Rev record back in 2013, there was a moment because we were just like, yeah, we got to capture feedback, We're hanging in that like Neil Young, Wilco, Pavement, vibe or strain or whatever you want to call it, path. And so there was a point, I think, where we were like, I was on the ground, like messing with pedals. And I guess there was like two of us out there. It was so loud. It was like I remember because I was in the control room and the guy who engineered it, Sam, was like, I have all the monitors turned off and it's still this loud. And it was just like blaring, dude. Past 11, dude. This is at like 12:30, and then I went out there, and I'm just like, or you are like messing with the pedals while somebody's holding the guitar up to the amp. I remember something, but we're basically just like trying to coax this like unrestrained, insane sound that it changes like with the littlest knobs. I've done this too with running just like a Boss distortion pedal through like a mixing board and then just in headphones, and then like doing feeding it back on itself, and then just flipping like a little bit of the EQ knobs and the tones that come out of it. You can't really control them, and it's the only thing you can really do is just record them so that you can like use them later however you want. But it's like, it is, what's the word? It's like, it's kind of because I guess you're interacting with nature a little bit. I don't know how to really say it. It's unpredictable. It's like a sonic storm or something. You couldn't really control it. The only way you can control is like turning off the amp or something, but like you want to get that thing screaming.
Yeah. It's like the music is happening to you at that point in a very literal sense. Instead of music being something that you produce, it's happening to you, and then recording allows you to capture it.
And you don't want to mess that up. Last thing you want to do is start chopping that up or like trying to tame it, because what you're recording is the untamed madness of like, man and machine engaging in an unpredictable way. Improvisation, really.
If you listen to like the first song on Pinkerton, I'm Tired, that is the sound of guitars come alive. And I mean, everything about that song is so blown out. The drums are so big, and Rivers is like an emotional wreck. So it feels like it's about to explode the whole time. But yeah, you can, you listen to a Weezer album now, and they're not interacting with their songs that way anymore. They've honed them into like a formulaic craft that has its own merits, but it doesn't have that I probably sound just like an old dude now, but
go ahead.
It's an unhinged it's an unhinged happening. I don't know.
Geese on, geezer.
Yeah, those are my favorite moments in recorded music, is when you feel it. It's like stuff's reaching reaching out of the speakers to grab you.
I think about that with, Jeff Tweedy's guitar playing on Ghost is Born.
Mm-hmm.
And then reading about that kind of bummed me out that I've heard multiple times or read in different places that he hates the way the guitars sound on Ghost is Born. That he's not happy with the or something along those lines. Like,
yeah.
And then when you hear that, man, it is like, I don't even know how to describe some of those moments, man.
Yeah, I mean the same thing. It's like Neil Young. If you listen to Cortez the Killer,
mm-hmm.
that's where Jeff Tweedy learned. It has to be where he learned how to play electric guitar, is listening to that sort of manic guitar work from Neil Young. It's not pretty. It's not, there are often like wrong notes, but it's like pure heart.
And it's letting the guitar, like you said, it's basically the guitar's happening to them.
Yeah, it's like like the guitar is using you as a channel or something. Maybe that's too spiritualist. I don't know. So that's how it feels sometimes, Like there's like a sound that wants to be made in the universe, and it's chosen this moment to be made, and you just happen to be holding the guitar.
And that's what Hendrix, I mean, that's what it feels like when you watch Hendrix do his thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. He's like conjuring something.
Yeah, he knew it was like a spiritual element to it.
Yeah, that's something I haven't fully explored, but it is a loss that I feel having moved to recording entirely in the box. Is like now it's literally just about the notes I'm picking or my performance, and maybe at some point they'll be able to create stuff that is responsive in the same way, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, man. I feel you. I get it. I think there are some digital ways to kind of achieve something like that, sort of, but it does take, it's interesting because there's like a lot of plugins and a lot of things like in the digital world that literally there's like buttons you can press that says like humanize things, or a lot of new plugins come in with like random elements added to it so that you can get things off the grid and you can get things more unpredictable, because I think, and that's like for me, when I see kind of like, I wouldn't call it resurgence, because I haven't followed hip hop for deep like that, because I know that there was a lot of jazz stuff sampled back in the day. When you heard the Kendrick record where there's like a ton, with To Pimp a Butterfly, where they Glasper, I think, is the piano player, and he had a bunch of jazz guys come on, Thundercat and like all these guys, and where you kind of had this, what I kind of saw happening is you had these locked in 4 on the floor kind of like elements that people were really into because it was so pure and so like on the grid. And then you had all these people coming in and saying, nah, dude, we're going to go off the grid, because humans don't want to hear things locked in all the time. They want to hear a little bit of, and of course these guys are all locked in, but they're locked in on a different level than we know. All the jazz guys,
yeah, totally.
they're speaking to each other in different languages than the common listener. But kind of like this resurgence or maybe I'm just starting to notice like the beautiful like elements of like hip hop involving jazz musicians and jazz players, is that there's a different kind of, there is a feel there that's not, it's human, I guess is what I'm saying. It's human. And that's why the MPC is cool too, is you're sampling drum beats into it, but there's a human always playing it, right? That locked in kind of feel is good in some ways, but then you're always looking kind of for that element of like surprise, or that there is a human swing, that's basically like what you're trying to achieve when you add these kind of newer elements of like randomization or swing elements, or kind of like subtly introducing these little things in the computer, because the computer doesn't, the computer has to be controlled by the human in order to get that feeling. And so then you got to add in buttons that say humanize, where it's like taking the 3rd or 5th hit on the hi-hat and just making it,
just nudging it. Yeah, it's fascinating, the relationship between humans and their machines.
Oh man, tell me about it.
I mean, because it's not as though guitars and tube amps aren't a different form of technology, right? In a way, I'm romanticizing an older form of technology that I think afforded me easier access to interesting outcomes, I don't. Part of that though is that a guitar plugged into an amp is like pretty straightforward. Like you
Yeah.
could throw some reverb on it, or some trem, or a compressor, or delay, but your options are pretty limited. And you got your tone knobs and your volume knobs and your drive knob, and so you can. What feedback is it's hitting the limit of the technology very quickly and easily.
Yes.
And like pushing it to its edge. Whereas when I do that to my computer, my hard drive burns out. That happened to me this summer. Like my computer just couldn't handle it. So I think that also everything being on the computer means that there aren't the constraints of, well, I have a guitar and an amp and 6 pedals. I have, a recording software. I could buy these 15,000 plugins and I could play every instrument known to man. And so it's not really like hitting the limits of the technology is not an option to me. So I lack that like visceral, almost like combative interaction with the technology I'm using. I'm combating this technology by like searching on YouTube to figure out how to make it work, not by like pushing it to its limit,
Genres get started when people push things to their limit. I mean, that's the electric guitar, the MPC, like taking something that was meant for one thing, but then, being an artist with it, and then you change it into something different, and then that like changes that starts a whole genre, a whole movement of like music.
Yeah, and there are definitely artists today that are pushing these things to their limits.
Yes,
like things that I would think of as almost like high art that I can hardly comprehend it because I can't imagine what I would have to do to be able to create it. Like it's so far removed from me.
You got examples?
Yeah, well, I think the clearest one for me is this band called Liturgy. They're a black metal band, but so much more. I think her name is Hunter Hunt Hendricks, the lead singer and guitar player and primary composer. She's pushing technology to its limit. Last year she put out a record called, I think it's called Hack, H-A-Q-Q. And then she just released a new kind of black metal orchestra opera called Origin of the Alimonies. And you listen to that stuff and you're like, okay, totally other plane. And then in kind of that's still very what I would consider like quite palatable. So a lot of people that aren't into metal will like, this Liturgy's like the one metal band that they'll dig. There are other bands like there's a band called Winter Quilt that is just kind of deconstructing music through technology in really fascinating ways. Or Fire Tools with a Z is doing like just fascinating stuff with.
So is this stuff that grates on you after a while, or is it like super, I mean, when they're pushing the limits, is it to the point of just noise where you can't understand it as like a regular everyday listener kind of thing?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask. Well, I'm pretty consumed with a style of music that I know is not very palatable to other people. So my wife, who does not like metal, likes Liturgy. But she would look at Winter Quilt or Fire Tools as sort of like strange, like kind of freakish musical projects.
I remember when I was really into Living Sacrifice. We were both really into Living Sacrifice, Christian metal band. Look them up. And I played them in the car, and my mom is like, "This is noise," and I'm like, "This is the most difficult stuff I've ever listened to in my life." Like that, what these guys are doing right now, or like X-Toll or something like that. And I'm like, these guys, how no, this is organized. This is good. This is thought through. This is mathematic. Like this isn't noise. But she couldn't hear it.
I mean, it makes sense because I've tried to figure this out because I don't really like that I've been consumed by metal for the last 5 or 6 years. It doesn't really it's actually sort of isolated me, I think, from a lot of musical friendship and made me feel alone. Because it's hard to share. Because it's like it's what you're doing in creating your musical world. Like you're building a sound and you're part of a community and you have all of these pieces and all these building blocks that go into the creation of your sound. And, if somebody just approaches it almost as an alien, like with no reference for where you sit in your space, where you sit in relationship to other artists, where you sit in relationship to your influences, then yeah, they're not going to understand it. I think that's a really tough thing for metal bands,
because they'll never get commercial popularity, really.
No. Especially because people push the limits, and you want to talk about places where they're pushing the limits. It continues to be in jazz, and I'd argue that it's in electronic music and in metal. People just like pushing themselves and their instruments to the edge, and that it sounds ridiculous to the common listener.
Right.
And that's okay. I mean, you kind of consign I guess if you're one of those people who's like playing in a brutal death metal band, you're just consigning yourself to, whatever small scene you're a part of, but that's your thing. So
that's what, like, with the hardcore scene and with metal is, like, the scene was so important. You didn't just like listen to these records. You did, or you do, but you have to go to the shows. I mean, that's kind of the whole part of it, is that there is, which right now in COVID must be just so detrimental to someone who's so connected to a scene like that, to not be able to go and experience that and get camaraderie with those other. I mean, that's what it felt like when we first met. It was like the two pastors' kids at this conference with punk rock shirts on, and we knew we were going to be homies, because I knew that you knew something that I knew, and it was different than everybody else. And that's why we connected, and then the scenes are so important in that way, because if you are out there kind of on this island, like really into this beautiful, amazing, life-changing music to you, and no one else understands it, and then when you go to that show and you see that guy wilding out too for the same thing, and you're like, oh my God, we have a connection here.
Yeah, the other day in the supermarket, I saw a guy with a Wolves in the Throne Room shirt on, and I was like, oh man, there's another one,
Yeah.
And I went up to him and I was like, dude, I love your shirt. And then let's just say that we didn't hit it off, and he kind of awkwardly followed me around the grocery store for the rest of the time, telling me about how he was hearing voices, in the background of this one record that we both love a lot. But anyway, maybe I'll see him again sometime, and we'll have another shot at it. But it's tough. It's been a tough year for artists, particularly artists in, I think, smaller scenes who don't get millions of streams and who exist on whatever they get from the door and the merch table. So I bought more vinyl this year than any year before, because I just figured, like,
God bless you.
Whatever money I was gonna pour into shows or whatever, they gotta get that funding somehow. So
yeah, if you want more music to come, I mean, I guess that's kind of what people, sometimes I try to get that message out there. Like, if you dig music and you want it to keep happening, then you need to support artists, like, point blank.
Yeah.
And, Spotify's not cutting it for a lot of the people that are making the stuff that you like. So like, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
And you could stop, paying people money and music would still be made, no question. But like, the squeeze that's being put on artists, I mean, and we're creative, so we work around it, right? I mean, that's kind of what we have going for us is, making bread out of water and yeast and flour. But like, if you want to support and continue to enjoy music as a fan, you got to support other artists. So I even think with artists that are like strapped for cash or whatever, it's so important to support other artists. You know what I mean? Because we understand what it's like, and we know it, and it's kind of like there is an ecosystem there that we need to kind of uphold, I think, in some ways.
It's a tough road, man. It's not one that I'm walking.
Yeah, brother.
I mean, it's been cool to see you kind of step into that. I know we got to run, so we can chat again.
All right, brother.
This was fun. I'll figure out how to get you this audio.
Yeah, man. Really grateful for your time, man. And we should just talk at another time, just to talk as brothers.
Indeed.
All right, man. Yeah. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Much love.
Peace, man. You too.